From the key concept, I want you to take a look again at two separate data sets, data set A and data set B. They have written on the data sets, first of all, a curved line to show the shape of the data. They've also identified the modes and the range of each of those data sets. The table shows the mean and the mean absolute deviation for each of those same data sets. And then they've made some comparative inferences. In general, the modes of data set B are greater than data set A, and the mean of data set B is greater than the mean of data set A. So the inference that can be made here is that the data points are generally greater in data set B. By looking at the ranges and the mean absolute deviations, or the MADs, of the data sets, you can see that both of them are similar. The range of data set A is 10, and the range of data set B is 11. So those are very close numbers. The mean absolute deviations are also very close, differing by only a couple of tenths. In other words, you can infer that the variabilities of the two data sets are about the same. Now we're going to take a look at a total of 4 questions. On this page, let's first take a look at questions 4 and 5. The first thing that we are asked to do in question 4 is to find the mean number of shots on goal for each week. So you'll notice on the clipboard that Coach Fisk recorded the number of shots on goal his first-line hockey players made during 2 weeks of hockey scrimmage. Week 1, day 1, they had 5 shots on goal. Week 1, day 2, 4 shots. Day 3, 6 shots. Then 8, 2, 3, and 7 for the remaining days of the week. To find the mean, remember you have to add up all of those values and divide by 7 because there are 7 pieces of data. And that's what we did right here. So the mean is 35 divided by 7, or 5. For week 2, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to add up the week 2 data values, 8, 7, 9, 5, 5, 7, 8, equals 49, and divide that by 7 and get a mean of 7. Now take a look at question 5. There are 2 parts here. Based on the mean for each week, in which week did his first line, that means his first line hockey players, take more shots on goal? Did they take more shots during week 1 or during week 2? Based on the mean, we would say that they took more shots in week 2. Okay. Based on the comparison of the mean and the range for week 1 and week 2, what could the coach infer? Well, before we make that inference, we need to look at the range for each of those weeks. The range for week 1 can be found by subtracting the greatest number of shots from the least number of shots. In this case, 8 take away 2. So the range for week 1 is 6. In week 2, the range is 4 because the greatest number of shots was 9 and the least number of shots was 5. So what kind of inference could the coach make? Well, looking at those 2 pieces of data, the mean for week 1 and the mean for week 2, and the range for week 1 and the range for week 2, the coach can infer that the team is improving. The mean was greater, meaning they're taking more shots on goal, and the range was smaller, which means they're being more consistent. On this page, we are only going to do number 7. So I want you to try to see if you can answer number 7, and then come back and check your answers with me. Go ahead and check your answer. Remember, to find the mean, you need to add up the numbers in the dot plot. Okay, so everywhere there's a dot, you need to add those numbers together and divide by the number of dots that are on the dot plot, which represents all the data values that were added. Once you have divided, then you have an average for that data set. So in Camp 1, the total is 303. Divide by 11 because there are 11 dots or 11 pieces of data, and you get a mean or average of 27 5/10. In Camp 2, you first had to show how to add together all of those dots that were present, and you should have gotten a total of 268. Divide that by 11, because again, there are 11 pieces of data in the dot plot, and you get an average of 24 4/10. So what we can conclude is that the mean values for the participants in Camp 1 jump higher in general. On this last page of work, we are only going to focus our attention on the assessment practice number 11. So go ahead and read the problem, take a look at the 2 dot plots and the 4 answer choices, and decide which you think best represents that information. Come back and check your answer after you've done so. Before we take a look at the answer, let's take a look at some information from each of those dot plots and see what kind of conclusions we might be able to draw. The sample from Round Lake shows a range of 21 to 15 or 6, which means the data are quite closely packed together. And you can see that there in the dot plot. You can see that from the shape, and you can also see that from the numbers. I've circled those down here. Okay. Second, from the sample from South Lake. So now we're down at the bottom dot plot. The range there goes from 21 to 11, so there's a wider range. Okay, there's a 10 number value range, and you can see by the shape of the data, that curve that follows those dots, how spread out those data values are. So now when we look at those inferences, it's best to not spend a ton of time trying to figure out things like the mean or the medians, or perhaps even the mean absolute deviation, those MAD factors, until you look at the comparative inferences to determine what else you might need to know. So when you read those 4 inferences, which one seems to be most closely related to what you see there in the dot plots? And the correct answer is C. There is less variation in weight between the small and large fish in Round Lake than between the small and large fish in South Lake. And by looking at the 2 dot plots, that makes sense. Variation tells us how different those values are. And in Round Lake, the values are pretty close together. Okay, the range is small, and the data values are all very closely packed together. There's not a lot of difference between them. Okay, in other words, the small fish in Round Lake, so those weighing maybe 15, 16, or 17 pounds, is not much different than the number of fish that are larger. But in South Lake, look at the differences in those fish. You have anything from an 11-pound fish to 5 13-pound fish, all the way up to a 21-pound fish and 5 19-pound fish. So there's a lot of differences there in those fish in South Lake. So the less variation in Round Lake is the correct inference. Now you're ready to try your work that goes with Lesson 6-4.